Council investigating alleged collusion with the Russians and obstruction of justice.
President, Davos is really great. Our country's doing great. A lot of money is coming into our country. We have many people from Davos bringing their money over here. I think it was a very successful trip.
Talking about the success of the Davos trip, but not addressing questions about Mueller. The question of whether the president actually tried to take out special counsel is an important one. Was the president simply discussing options, or was there an attempt to obstruct justice? The New York Times reporting that Mr. Trump only backed down from his demand to fire Mueller after the White House counsel, Don McGahn, threatened to quit. The story first surfaced last June. We reported on it then. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts was told at the time that the president did discuss firing Mueller, not order it, with McGahn and other aides, but backed down after McGahn told him the result would be disastrous.
The president was also taking fire today for a statement made by a friend of his, Newsmax CEO Chris Ruddy, who suggested President Trump was considering the removal of special counsel Robert Mueller.
I think he's considering perhaps terminating the special counsel.
The statement prompted front-page headlines and outrage from Democrats.
Okay, so that's back in June, and tonight sources tell Fox News the president did go so far as to ask McGahn if he would talk to Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein about the idea of firing Mueller, but never ordered McGahn to have him fired. Sources also tell Fox News McGahn never threatened to resign over the matter. So where do we go from here, if anywhere? Sarah Westwood is the White House correspondent for the Washington Examiner, joins us live. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Okay, so this is an odd story to talk about because it's a story about something that didn't happen.
Exactly. So all of these conversations about obstruction of justice are really hypotheticals. Would this have constituted obstruction of justice if President Trump had followed through on this threat? And at the end of the day, we don't know how seriously President Trump made it. It's no secret that he doesn't believe the basis for the investigation is legitimate. He's been saying that from the beginning. It's no secret either that at the beginning of the investigation, he had a much more adversarial attitude toward Robert Mueller. And it wasn't really until Ty Cobb came on his legal team that they backed off, calling this a witch hunt. So a lot of this has been known, and it's interesting to look at it in the context of John Roberts' reporting from last year when fresher minds characterized this as a more casual conversation.
Yeah. This is what the president had to say when he was asked about it in Davos, pressed on this idea that he ordered the firing.
Did you fire Robert Mueller? Did you want to fire Robert Mueller?
Fake news, folks. Fake news.
What's your message today?
Typical New York Times fake stories.
All right, so here is what Senator Chuck Grassley had to say, a prominent Republican on the Senate side. He said this: if these latest reports are true, it seems to me that they show the president listened to good advice from his advisors. Based on his statements from the last couple of weeks, he and his lawyers appear to be cooperating with Mueller. But that's not the way the story is being portrayed at all. That's certainly not the angle that he actually listened to some good advice and didn't do it.
Right. It feeds into this narrative that has already been building around the investigation that maybe President Trump hasn't been as cooperative as he could have been, that maybe what Mueller is looking at now is not so much collusion because no evidence has emerged to suggest that anything really resembling collusion took place on the campaign. But now it's obstruction. So now that's the conversation we're having, is if anybody tried to subvert Mueller's investigation. And it's interesting to see the goalposts move as we get deeper into this investigation.
Yeah, and this is what Congressman Adam Schiff, Democrat, the ranking member over on the House Intelligence Committee, had to say. Congress must make clear that any effort to remove the special counsel or impede his work would touch off a constitutional crisis, which would imperil this presidency and do grave damage to our nation. That's pretty apocalyptic. We've heard a lot of similar language from the Democrats about the tax bill and all kinds of other things. It's clear, though, it sounds like Don McGahn convinced the president you might get to this point. This might really be bad for the country and for your presidency if you move forward with this idea.
Absolutely. I think there's no question, even if you don't believe that there's a legitimate basis underlying the Mueller probe, if President Trump had removed Robert Mueller at the beginning of the investigation. Remember, he was only appointed in May 2017, so this would have been only a month into the investigation. It would have caused a major crisis for the Trump presidency. And the White House has sort of been highlighting how much they've cooperated with him lately, highlighting that they've given 20,000 pages of documents to the special counsel that 20 White House officials have voluntarily submitted for interviews. So they're starting to try to highlight that they've done nothing to obstruct the probe so far.
And just this week, the president said when he was asked about it, I can't wait to talk to him. I'd love to do it sooner rather than later. I'd love to do it under oath. Of course, I'll consult with my attorneys because I immediately, as an attorney, think they're sitting there like, wait, what is he saying? So apparently there's going to be some legal consultation there, but he says he's raring to do it.
One would hope there would be some legal consultation there, but he did also highlight in that meeting, which I also attended, that Hillary Clinton was not placed under oath when she was interviewed by FBI agents. It is not necessarily typical to be put under oath, as I understand it, in one of those voluntary interviews with FBI agents. And during the Clinton email probe, that was really the last step that investigators took. A few days later, James Comey came out and closed it. So there's been some speculation that if President Trump is about to sit down, we could be nearing the end of the probe.
Well, we'll see. But again, he's denying the reports that he ordered the firing, and we have the reporting for John Roberts at the time, way back when. So, Sarah, thank you for helping us break it down.
Thank you.
Good to see you. All right, President Trump also focusing tonight on a battle he's been having with Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer over DACA. Congressional Republicans and many of the president's supporters remain torn on the White House's new immigration proposal. Doug McKelway is tracking the latest on how it's going. Hey, Doug.
Hi, Shannon. You know, and there's one thing to really keep in mind as you listen to the latest on the immigration negotiations. The Democrats want to win control of Congress next November. That's only 10 months away, and they are not going to do that by cooperating with the Republican agenda. It helps to explain what happened today. Senate and House Minority Leaders Schumer and Pelosi already under fire for losing last week's government shutdown standoff. Today trashed President Trump's immigration framework, even though it more than doubles the number of Dreamers, 1.8 million, who would be granted citizenship. Pelosi was especially vitriolic.
That plan is a campaign to make America white again.
Schumer, meanwhile, acknowledged that during last week's White House meeting on immigration, he demanded that the president's go-to man on immigration, Stephen Miller, not be present at that meeting.
We must take our vote. Good afternoon.
Well, apparently we don't have that sound there, but Schumer also tweeted today about the president's immigration framework. He said, quote, unfortunately, this plan flies in the face of what most Americans believe. The president fired back on Twitter on his way back from Davos tonight, quote, DACA has been made increasingly difficult by the fact that crying Chuck Schumer took such a beating over the shutdown that he is unable to act on immigration. This is all a bad sign, Shannon, of what may lie ahead. In addition, Republicans have trouble within their own caucus. Many conservatives, especially on the House side, are fearful the plan leans too far towards accommodating Dreamers, not far enough for border security.
If it's the other way around, which is what Mr. Durbin wants and what Senator Graham wants, which is a focus on DACA first and then a little pretend security and a little pretend border wall and pretend chain migration, that's a different animal, and I won't be for that.
Meanwhile, moderates have their own ideas.
They're not going to be locked down by thinking about what the House might do or what the White House might do. We're going to move on our own.
So add to all this fragmentation, the Democrats may use the short-term deadline for government funding, which is only February 8th, just a little while away, as leverage in the immigration debate. GOP leaders McConnell and Ryan, meanwhile, both support the president's framework. Ryan says it will help reach a balanced solution. McConnell noting it will provide guidance as they work towards an agreement. A lot of balls being juggled at this point. It's going to be very, very complex if any agreement is reached at all, Shannon.
It is. A lot of room for negotiation there. All right, Doug McKelway, live for us tonight in D.C. Thank you.
My pleasure.
All right, Davos was an eye-opener for many in the media. Not only did the president get a warm welcome from foreign CEOs, the media was taken by surprise, apparently, when the chairman of the World Economic Forum seemed to take the president's side on this war on alleged fake news.
It was rather remarkable to hear the founder of this World Economic Forum also take jabs at the press and say that the president is the victim of biased interpretations and misconceptions. All in all, that was a fairly pitiful display. I think to have so many business and global leaders here have those kinds of statements made with the president by his side.
A pitiful display. Let's talk about it with Vince Coglianese, the editorial director at the Daily Caller and host of WMAL Mornings on the Mall and co-host of The Five right here on Fox News, Juan Williams. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good to be with you.
Thank you.
Okay, I gotta say the reaction by many in the mainstream media and certainly on the left was sort of surprised that the president did not completely crash and burn at Davos. There's been, all kinds of different praise. Let's hear from the CEO of Salesforce.com about how he thinks the president represented the U.S.
very well represented the American policies that he's put into place and his position, and encouraged the discussions to continue. And that's why I love the World Economic Forum.
Okay, and we also heard from the Denmark Minister of Industry said that he believes, based on what's happening with the Trump administration, a lot more investors are going to be pouring money into the States, Juan.
Well, what he was speaking about was with the new lower tax rate, 21% tax rate. He thinks that we are more competitive in terms of the global marketplace. So I think, Shannon, the key point for me was hearing the president say America first does not mean America alone, and saying that in front of this crowd. Now, on the other hand, a key point to take away from me is, gee, this is Donald Trump. This is the guy who really cursed out the billionaire crowd.
Right, the global elite.
Right, and he said these people are not working for America, and he, Donald Trump, was coming in for the forgotten man and woman who's being left behind. Well, now he's taken a trip to Davos, and he's with the global elites. And I think, in essence, he reassured them. I'm not sure how that plays back at home, but he has been very clear that the stock market's booming. He feels good about the American economy, and his bottom line, and I thought this was just a very good statement. He said, if America does well, the world does well. Now, I'm sure other people in the world may say, hey, we think if we do well, you'll do well. But he's the president of the United States.
Yeah, okay, so there was also this laudatory account of what had happened, that there was a jam-packed auditorium to hear him, that there was a surprisingly warm reception, that he was well received by the billionaire investors, corporate executives, and heads of state who a year ago were fretting that Mr. Trump's election would mean the demise of the global order that they had built, but today we're celebrating his tax cuts and regulatory rollback. Vince, that's from the New York Times.
Yes, I know. It's amazing, isn't it? Well, yeah. I think the reason you've seen so much kind of like left-wing shock, or at least mainstream media shock at all of this, is because there's a lot of projection going on. I mean, the idea is like, if we don't like him, everyone else must not like him. And seeing him go into an environment where you thought that you sort of had a shared audience and have a different reaction, I think is kind of shocking to the American press. And remember, these guys are judging the president based on his actions. These are world leaders. These are business leaders. They're assessing how it affects their bottom lines. This is not an emotional quest for them. This is one that really is about, how is this good for me, and how can I take advantage of the fact that President Trump is interested in increasing the average American's stake in the world. When you say America first but not America alone, I think what's key here is that the president emphasized he wanted to be a cheerleader for the country. He's trying to attract their business to America. It's pretty clear he's exploiting their shared interests to the benefit of the United States.
Juan, what did you make of this dinner that he had with a number of the CEOs who sat there praising him and saying, we love what you've done with the tax code, we love your rolling back of regulations, and we plan to pour more money into the U.S., when a lot of people said, listen, that is him in his element. He's used to being around business leaders, and that's what he does. But some people almost seem disappointed that it went so well.
I don't think people are disappointed. You know, I think this is, in the case of Donald Trump, look, he didn't bully anybody. He didn't use any profanity. There was no sort of moment when everything blew up and you said, oh my God, what did he just say to all these big money guys that we want to come here? To the contrary, it looked like he was, you know, behaving in a very normal manner and very complimentary and warm. Now, if he, for example, if he came on Shannon Bream at night,
the invitation is always open, Mr. President. Give us a call.
We would just have a party for him. We would treat him.
Would?
Yeah, because what you know about Donald Trump is he loves flattery. He loves luxury. He loves to be with the rich and famous, right?
Is that us?
That's you. And so I think
that's
this,
one.
I think, but you know, when you stop and think about things that are not going well, like tariffs, or like the breakdown of the trade deals like NAFTA and the
He feels like that's going well from his viewpoint.
Well, no, because he said today, this was interesting, he said if he could get back in, if they would renegotiate the Asian trade deal, the TPP, he would come back in. So I think that people thought this is a much more reasoned and approachable Donald Trump than we're accustomed to.
Very quick, Vince.
I think he's been pretty consistent on the fact that he wants to renegotiate what he saw as bad deals for a while. And if that means jumping back into TPP in some way, that would be a pretty amazing turnabout. But if it's a good deal for the United States, then that's a win. And I think he's got so many economic indicators that he can point to that are successes right now.
All right, gentlemen, you are successes tonight.
Thank you.
I don't know what this is about visiting the rich and famous on Fox News at night, but come back. Come back anytime.
Yeah.
All right,
Can't wait. I'm aspiring.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
All right, a report by Politico claims President Trump's planning to sign an executive order to keep the military prison open at Guantanamo Bay. Now, that would reverse the Obama-era directive to get that prison closed down, he promised. According to the report, the president's expected to announce the order next week during his State of the Union address. Well, for the third straight week, U.S. health officials say the flu has blanketed the U.S. Only Hawaii is the only state being spared. Last week, 1 in 5 doctor visits were for flu-like symptoms. It's the highest level of flu activity since the swine flu pandemic in 2009. The CDC estimates this flu season is at its midpoint, still urging people to be very vigilant to try to avoid the virus. Well, still to come, there's a big change coming at Planned Parenthood. We'll take a closer look at the tenure of Cecile Richards. And with so many illegal immigrants at the center of the current political debate, we will chat live with a woman who emigrated legally from Brazil and says she is fed up with the dreamers and their defenders.
Hi, everyone. I'm a legal immigrant, and I was watching Chuck Schumer give his speech during the shutdown, and I honestly wanted to vomit.
The long-awaited immigration reform plan from the White House was released yesterday, lighting a fire on the left and the right over the proposed pathway to citizenship for 1.8 million illegal immigrants. Trump loyalists are calling the proposal amnesty. Republican Mississippi State Senator Chris McDaniel saying it is concerning why anyone would attempt to repeat history by granting amnesty. And another vocal Trump ally, Republican Senate candidate in Virginia, Corey Stewart, says any amnesty, including an extension of DACA, would lead to drawing millions of new immigrants into the country illegally. I'm not happy about it. Well, my next guest is a legal immigrant from Brazil. She's gone viral over a Facebook video, more than 1 million views, outlining her criticism of illegal immigration. Cibele Capizuti, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Great to have you.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you for having me.
I watched this video. It's just under 9 minutes long, and I know that you've posted some other things on Facebook, but you talk about the fact that you don't want the U.S. to turn into what you left behind in Brazil, and you say people who are here illegally and demonstrating in the streets, it's frustrating to you to see that, and you're telling them if they're not happy, go home.
Exactly.
So how's that being received? Because did you have some trouble with Facebook at one point? Because we had reports that maybe some of what you had to say on Facebook was not well received.
Well, some people, of course, didn't like it, and I was called every name in the world, and some names that I didn't even know existed. But it's okay, you know. I expected that. I expected that some people were not going to like it. But I said what had to be said. I think that legal immigrants like myself have never been heard. There is so much debate on this issue, and everybody forgets that people like me have paid the price to be in this country, and we went through all the legal steps to be here. And it's really a slap in the face of all the legals that are here, that somebody can just walk in illegally or overstay their visa, and then years later, you know, they are rewarded with the same citizenship that we work so hard for.
And you said that it's hard, it's costly, it's lengthy. I've known people who've gone through the process. I know that there's nothing easy about coming here legally.
No.
But let me ask you about the people who were brought here as children. They're adults now. There's no conflict about that. These are clearly people in their 20s and 30s. But do you think, because they were brought here as kids, do you think what the White House is proposing, this 10 to 12-year path to citizenship, do you think it's fair, it's not fair? Where do you stand?
Personally, I'm on the fence with that. If I had a say on this, I think, you know, I'm not heartless. I wouldn't say send them all back, you know, but I would propose a permanent green card without citizenship. Because I don't think, you know, like if you committed a crime and you go to prison, you lose your right to vote. Why should somebody that has entered the country illegally, which is a crime, be rewarded with a path to citizenship that eventually will lead to vote? So,
you said also in your video that this country has afforded more freedom or opportunity than any other place in the world. And that's why you were willing to kind of run this gauntlet and go through the whole process. Do you think other people appreciate that the way you do?
You mean the people that are here illegally?
Yeah, do you think that they appreciate the opportunity that's there? Because I know that you've questioned about why some of them haven't fought harder to start the citizenship process and that kind of thing.
No, I don't. I don't. I work in the construction industry, and so I've had close contact with illegals and legals and everybody from all over because of the business that I work in. And I can tell you that we do not work for, we don't appreciate. You know, so people that come here and they're here illegally, they don't go through the whole process of becoming a citizen the way I did and so many others did. They don't appreciate what this country has to offer. And I really think it's a completely different perspective.
Well, it's a very interesting perspective coming through what you've been through, and you close out the video by talking about the fact that people who have fought like you, legal immigrants to come here, outnumber those who are here illegally, you believe, and say, reminding lawmakers that you're going to vote based on what they do. And so we'll see if they're listening. Sibeli Capizzuti, thank you very much. Very interesting video, and we'll keep up with you.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
All right, fresh off his trip to Davos, President Trump wants to inject billions more into our military, a boost the administration says is needed to potentially confront old foes who have spent the past decade modernizing their forces while the U.S. has fallen behind. Lucas Tomlinson from the Pentagon tonight with more.
Shannon, President Trump wants to boost defense spending, fulfilling a campaign promise to rebuild the military, which suffered from recent budget cuts and 16 years of war. A senior defense official tells Fox Trump will ask Congress for $716 billion when the Pentagon rolls out its 2019 budget next month, a 13% increase over 2017. The boost in defense spending will modernize the nuclear force, including missiles dating back to the 70s. Aging aircraft will also be replaced, the troops given a pay raise. Defense Secretary Mattis says China and Russia, not terrorism, are now the biggest threats facing the U.S.
Yet our competitive edge has eroded in every domain of warfare: air, land, sea, space, and cyberspace, and it is continuing to erode.
As an example, out of 542 F-8 can't fly today. Only 31% are fully mission capable, according to the head of Naval Aviation. But for the first time in 2 years, Super Hornets rolled off the assembly line at Boeing. The Navy wants 90 new ones in the next 5 years. Ballistic missile submarines like the USS Kentucky are nearly 30 years old, but still counted on to patrol for 90 days at a time, carrying 24 Trident D5 intercontinental ballistic missiles, each carrying multiple independent nuclear warheads. One submarine like this can destroy roughly 180 cities. Last week, the U.S. deployed nuclear-capable B-52 bombers to England to fly patrols. But the newest B-52 in the Air Force is more than 50 years old. Thursday, Russian President Vladimir Putin was on hand to see Russia's newest supersonic bomber, which NATO calls Blackjacks, also capable of launching nuclear weapons. But Russia wasn't the only threat on President Trump's mind today in Davos.
We continue to call on partners to confront Iran's support for terrorists and block Iran's path to a nuclear weapon. We are committed to ensuring that Afghanistan never again becomes a safe haven for terrorists.
But keep in mind, Congress still hasn't passed the 2018 budget, and another government shutdown looms if it's not passed in the next 2 weeks. Shannon?
Lucas, thank you very much. Big changes coming for Planned Parenthood. What does it mean for the organization's future as it now faces a Justice Department investigation? And Trace Gallagher breaks down a new sexual misconduct scandal and claims that Hillary Clinton protected a former aide in trouble. A new round of sexual misconduct allegations breaking tonight. The New York Times reporting Hillary Clinton was involved when she apparently intervened to stop the firing of a senior advisor on her 2008 presidential campaign after he was accused of sexual harassment. Trace Gallagher has more details. Trace?
Shannon, during the 2008 campaign, Bernd Strider was Hillary Clinton's faith advisor and the co-founder of the American Values Network. Every morning during the campaign, he would send Mrs. Clinton scripture readings. Strider was also accused repeatedly of sexually harassing a young subordinate who he apparently shared an office with. The young woman alleged that Strider, who was married, often rubbed her shoulders, inappropriately kissed her on the forehead, and sent her a string of suggestive emails. She first complained to the National Director of Operations for the 2008 campaign, who in turn brought the complaint to campaign manager Patty Solis Doyle, who then recommended to Hillary Clinton that Strider be fired. The New York Times says Clinton refused, and instead the young woman who complained was given a different job inside the campaign. There's been no comment from Hillary Clinton, but a Clinton spokesman did provide a statement from the law firm that represented the 2008 campaign, saying, quote, to ensure a safe working environment, the campaign had a process to address the complaints of misconduct or harassment. When matters arose, they were reviewed in accordance with these policies and appropriate action was taken. There's no indication of exactly what action was considered appropriate, and until now, former Clinton associates were reportedly unwilling to talk about the events. But the Me Too movement changed that, and 8 former campaign officials decided to go public, though the woman who made the accusations is not among them. Remember, the Clinton candidacy has been cited as an inspiration for the Me Too movement, even though the primary factor in the movement, Harvey Weinstein, was a longtime friend and donor to the Clintons. And actress Lena Dunham claims she warned the 2016 Clinton campaign to steer clear of Weinstein, who she called a rapist. The campaign denies this. As for Bernd Strider, he was later hired to lead an independent group that supported the 2016 Clinton campaign, but he was reportedly fired for numerous workplace issues, including harassing a young female aide. Shannon.
Trace Gallagher, thank you very much. Well, after 12 years at the helm of Planned Parenthood, Cecile Richards took to Twitter today to announce she will be stepping down as that organization's president. So what legacy will she leave behind? Immersed in left-wing politics from an early age, 16-year-old Cecile Richards helped her mother successfully campaign for the attorney who won Roe v. Wade, ultimately landing that lawyer a seat in the Texas legislature. After graduating from Brown University, Richards went on to champion progressive and Democratic causes, including a stint as deputy chief of staff for Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi. She took her progressive activism to a new level when she became president of Planned Parenthood 12 years ago.
And together we've built a movement to protect and improve reproductive health.
She built up the organization, taking the volunteer base from 2.5 to 11 million, and by fundraising from the rich and famous, lobbying the halls of power and marketing to the masses. The organization now receives more than $500 million in taxpayer funding every year.
A lot of people go to Planned Parenthood for just one reason.
Planned Parenthood says that can be anything from a flu shot to diabetes testing. Its most recent annual report shows the organization performed 321,384 abortions as well. In announcing her decision to step down, Richards leaves behind an organization facing a hostile Congress and state-level political challenges. More than 40 states have some kind of restriction on abortions. In 2015, Republicans nearly shut down the government over taxpayer funding for Planned Parenthood, and now the Republican-led Congress sounds more committed than ever to ending it.
The time has come for us to look at why we would be funding almost half of their budget when they have only thing that is stable in their organization is the number of abortions they do every year. Every other service is declining and their clinics are closing.
In 2015, the organization became mired in scandal when a 26-year-old activist named David Daleiden recorded Planned Parenthood officials discussing pricing for fetal body parts and tissue left over after abortions.
$30 to $100 price, that's per specimen that we're talking about. Right, yeah.
Yes. And caught medical research firms boasting of their relationship.
I mean, Planned Parenthood has volume.
Right.
You know, because they're a volume institution.
The man behind those videos is now facing criminal charges. Satanic temple suing on religious grounds over the topic of abortion. We're going to see if the Satanists have a case straight ahead. And speaking of going to court, a handful of rich states are so upset about tax cuts. You heard that right. They're lawyering up against the Trump administration. Now, could it mean you lose your tax cut? That's straight ahead. Led to scores of companies offering employee perks, bonuses, and pay hikes. But could it all come to a screeching halt thanks to Democratic governors from just 3 states? California, New York, and New Jersey announcing a new coalition tonight against President Trump's tax cut law, saying it discriminates against states with high-income residents. Joining us now with more on what's behind this new legal challenge, Paul Blair, Strategic Initiatives Director at Americans for Tax Reform. Great to see you tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so I'm a little confused here because we were told that this was a tax cut for the rich, and that's why this is a bad bill. But now it seems like they want to sue because people who are high tax earners in their states will have to pay more.
Yeah, so it all comes down to something called the state and local tax deduction, which was created early 1900s when we created the income tax rate at the national level. And of course, the fear then was that total tax liabilities between the state and federal government may exceed 100%.
Yeah, just wipe people out.
Yeah, and so it has always been designed to protect against people paying more than they actually owed. What's funny, of course, about this I guess, not necessarily legal fight, I would call it much more a political fight, is that for Democrats who attacked the Trump tax plan, Republican tax plan over the last year, it has always been under the accusation that this benefits the rich, that low-income earners don't benefit, but rich people do. And of course, now with the state and local tax deduction, of which is really only taken advantage of by high earners, of people who itemize, it's about 95% of people who claim the SALT deduction. It is really a fight about now.
People.
Yeah, it is now their fight to protect rich people in their states.
Okay, so here's what the New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy says. It is a clear and politically motivated punishment of blue states like New Jersey and our neighbors who already pay far more to the federal government than we receive. We will not stand by and allow this to happen. And that's what we've repeatedly heard from these states. They pay so much into the federal coffers that they're not getting it back. Is that fair?
Well, I think where Governor Murphy and Governor Malloy of Connecticut and Governor Cuomo of New York would better focus their attention would be on their own tax and spending burdens in their states. The reason that the state and local tax deduction is so important to those states is because their tax rates are too high. Between New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, they have the highest state and local tax burdens in the entire country. So this has nothing to do with tax rates at the federal level. It has everything to do with the fact that for decades, they've paid no attention or concern to what's going on in their own states.
Well, and here's the thing, too, is that rates have gone up. Different rates have changed and gone up in the Obama years, but I didn't hear any of these states talking about suing then.
Absolutely. So the top income tax rate went up 5 points under President Obama. Cuomo or no other Democrat governor sued because of how upset they were that top earners in their states were going to be punished. And the tax on capital income actually went up 9% at this time. And so from recent tax hikes that Democrats imposed on their residents, all the way back to the alternative minimum tax, which is almost 50 years old, which only hit a couple of people to begin with, but now hits a lot of people in states like New York and elsewhere. They never sued on that. It has nothing to do with that.
And they're still trying to figure out what their legal theory is. I thought this was interesting. In a piece by Tax Foundation, Jared Walzak says they've announced their intent to sue, but they don't yet know why. They feel confident that it is illegal, but they don't have yet a theory as to how. The same politicians who decried tax cuts for the rich are now suing because the new tax law limits a tax break for the rich. So we're waiting on the lawsuit. We don't know what the theory is going to be.
I hope the outcome, though, is that a number of Democrats in these states become very familiar with the 10th Amendment. If that is the best outcome, they're going to read it a couple of times, or perhaps in future tax and regulatory fights be much more familiar with it. Unfortunately for them, after reading the 10th Amendment or the Commerce Clause or anything else, they're not going to find, I think, a solid legal strategy that allows them to sue because so many people are getting tax cuts, but that the rest of the country will no longer subsidize their very, very high tax rates.
All right, we will stand by, because if they file this in the right place and get a judge who puts the whole tax law on hold, which is what is often happening with what goes on with this administration, we could see a lot of people out there don't want to lose their tax cuts. So.
Absolutely.
All right, Paul, great to have you in.
Thanks for having me.
All right, jurors, get ready, because night court is up after this break. A Satanist group suing Missouri over an abortion law. Our legal eagles will bring you the arguments, plus an update from a previous night court. The verdict is in on Sheriff David Clarke's controversial Facebook posts. What did the jury decide?
You wouldn't believe what's in this keister. A farmer's market.
Violate a man's free speech with taunting Facebook posts. The man was detained after shaking his head at the former sheriff on a flight. After his release, he wrote a Facebook post and followed up by 2 responses then from Sheriff Clarke on Facebook as well. Now, the passenger claims they were threatening posts and violated his right to free speech. Well, the jury did not think so, and I think it only took them 2 hours to decide, but we wanted to make sure you had that update. Well, time now for tonight's night court. We pass no judgment on these stories, but present them to you, our jury, for consideration. A Satanist group is challenging a Missouri state law which requires women seeking abortion to get a booklet saying life begins at conception. The case was heard this week at the Missouri Supreme Court. We now await their decision. This is what the Satanists allege. They say the law violates the Constitution's Establishment Clause as well as the state's Religious Freedom and Restoration Act. Our legal eagles are here to argue both sides. Bob Bianchi, a criminal defense attorney and former head county prosecutor, he has volunteered and been good enough to represent the Satanist side, so don't blast him on Twitter if that's not your position. And Emily Campagno, a former criminal defense attorney and former federal attorney, will represent Missouri State. Welcome to you both.
Good to be here, Shannon. Thank you.
Okay, so this is the state of Missouri's argument, Bob. Even if this plaintiff here has alleged a restriction on free exercise of religion because she says her religion, as Satanist, tells her that this is not, there's no life begins at conception, any of that. The informed consent law clearly serves a compelling state interest and is not unduly restrictive on her asserted exercise of religion. How do you respond?
Okay, so to the jury, here's what we got here. First of all, let's set it straight that these people are not devil worshippers. They use this title for branding. What they are is anti-government intrusion and individual liberty people, and they go around trying to make sure that government doesn't interfere with their individual liberties. The irony here, Shannon, is that the Catholic Church, evangelical Christians, this Satan Temple, as they call themselves, and others actually have something in common. Hobby Lobby. They believe government should not be involved in reproductive rights of women, and they believe that, by the way, it's not just a booklet. They've got to wait a 72-hour period. They have to sign off on this document that says that conception is where a human being is separate.
That they've read it, not that they agree with it, but that they've read this booklet.
Right, and then they have to wait 72 hours. And what this group is saying is that the Satan here is the government. The government has no right to interfere with the reproductive rights of women, just like they didn't with Hobby Lobby. And they're using Hobby Lobby, the evangelical Catholic Church case that said the Affordable Health Care Act could not mandate or should not mandate that companies, Hobby Lobby in particular, force them to buy insurance with contraception. They're using that to say same thing here. I think they're going to have a good argument constitutionally.
All right. Let's bring in Emily here. This is what the Satanic Temple spokesman, Jex Blackmore, and I mean, choosing the Satanist temple as your branding method is an interesting choice, whether you believe in it or not. Interesting branding. All right, no medical or other compelling purpose, they say, for this law. They say the state has essentially established a religious indoctrination program intended to promote a religious viewpoint that life begins at conception. The law is intended to punish women who disagree with this opinion. So, Emily, why should it be upheld?
Right. I mean, that's obviously inflamed rhetoric on the part of the spokesperson, because the bottom line is that the informed consent laws, as you stated earlier, clearly serve compelling state interests and are not unduly restrictive on this woman's asserted free exercise of religion. Now, it's important to note for viewers that the United States Supreme Court has taken a hands-off approach to the individual states' decisions of pre-abortion laws, of these informed consent laws. And Missouri is far from alone in its conservative approach. Almost half the states require some sort of waiting period. Almost 40 require counseling. And along with Missouri, 10 require ultrasound viewings, and 5 require that communication that personhood begins at conception. Now, conservative Missouri just in 2007 rendered midwifery legal. And I bring that up because the reason this case is before the Missouri Supreme Court is on a jurisdictional issue. It's not that the lower courts decided in favor of plaintiffs here. And note, in 1989, the U.S. Supreme Court showed deference to restrictive abortion laws coming out of Missouri Supreme Court and said, we note that our holding here today allows for governmental regulation in the abortion field that wouldn't have held up under prior state Supreme Court laws. So essentially, they're letting Missouri have autonomy, and if it ever becomes before the Supreme Court, they'll approve it as well.
All right. Well, you two have made very interesting arguments, Bob and Emily, and we'll wait to see what the Missouri Supreme Court decides. In the meantime, we thank